Moana is hands down one of my all-time favorite Disney movies. The music is unforgettable, the animation is breathtaking, and Moana herself, easily one of the most inspiring Disney protagonists of the modern era. She's independent, she's resilient, and she's courageous. What I love most about her is how realistic her emotional growth feels. She's torn between following her heart and the ocean that calls it, while also being the leader that her people need her to be. She stumbles, she doubts herself, and she even questions if she's enough. But what makes her so incredible is how she gets back up, drawing strength not only from her own courage, but from the people and connections around her. With such a remarkable first movie, I'll admit, I was skeptical about the sequel. Could it possibly live up to the sky-high standards of the original? And when I found out it was originally supposed to be a Disney Plus limited series, only to be reworked into a full movie at the last minute, I couldn't help but worry that this was going to be a complete letdown. So, was Moana 2 worth the wait? Could it be the game changer that Disney Animation Studios needs to overcome its recent criticisms? Well, I have a lot to say about that. From the underwhelming characters to some downright baffling creative choices, we're diving deep into Moana 2 with what went right and what went so wrong. My name is Julie Q. When I'm not overanalyzing Disney movies, I'm streaming a variety of games over on Twitch 3 times a week. Here's a little snippet of what that looks like. An ugly piece of trash. So like I would binge something and then be like, this is my whole personality now. This is cool, thanks. I agree, corn's cool. I know we need our emergency savings. Can't we just fly to Disney instead? Now let's get into Disney's Moana 2. For those of you who haven't seen it yet or might need a quick refresher, here's a rundown of Moana 2's main story. The movie opens to Moana climbing a giant mountain with Pua and Heihei in tow. She reaches the top where she calls out using a conch shell, hoping to connect with other people. We quickly learn that Moana's island has been completely isolated since before even the events of the first movie. Because of Heihei, she discovers a ceramic piece with a painting on it of a mountain and people, so believing it's a clue to a hidden civilization, she brings it back to her island. Meanwhile, Maui is in a dark, unfamiliar place, seemingly lost. Back on Moana's island, she learns more about the ceramic piece's lore, which leads her to set out on an adventure to find this mysterious island. But there's a catch. The island is under a curse placed by Nalo, a storm god who despises humans. She takes 3 people from her island along on this adventure: the island historian and artist, a young energetic engineer, and the island's most knowledgeable farmer. And of course, Pua and Heihei come along too. Moana sings a song about their journey and how incredible the ocean is, but it's mostly a way to try to get her crew to work a little bit better together. Then they run into the Kakamora. Remember those little coconut guys from the first movie? Plot twist, they're not enemies anymore. Turns out that their home was lost when the very island that Moana is searching for was cursed. Moana and her crew agree to help the Kakamora by defeating a giant clam in exchange for their help in finding the lost island. But instead of defeating the clam, they, and one extra Kakamora, end up getting swallowed by it. Inside the clam, they find none other than Maui, who's been stuck there this whole time. Maui thinks that the person who imprisoned him here is the villain of this story. Her name is Matangi, an implied demigod with the power to control bats. But after Matangi sings a little song, having separated Moana from the rest of her crew, we find out that instead of being the true villain, she's actually helping them by opening up a portal to get them directly to that lost island. The final showdown kicks off with the crew facing Nalo's storm and the sea monsters with it. Moana quickly realizes that Nalo's hatred is entirely directed at the humans, which means it's not paying much attention to Maui. She uses that to her advantage, giving Maui the chance to pull the island out of the ocean with his hook. But just as things seem to be going their way, Maui is defeated and loses all of his tattoos. With hope dwindling, Moana has a sudden realization. The curse only ever said that a human needs to touch the island to break it. So, she dives to the bottom of the ocean and does just that, touching the island and breaking the curse. The storm clears, but Moana's heroic act cost her. Maui retrieves her lifeless body from under the water. But don't worry, her ancestors appear, blessing her and transforming her into a demigod. And Maui got his tattoos back too at some point around now. With her newfound powers, Moana greets the people that can now find each other because the curse is broken. She returns home as the bridge between her island and the rest of the world. In a post-credit scene, we see Nalo realizing that Matangi helped Moana, setting the stage for what will likely be Moana 3. One of my biggest problems with this movie is how disconnected the story feels from the new island and its lore by the end. Maui's storyline, especially the part where he loses his tattoos, had so much potential. Why not tie the new island to him in some way? Or maybe do that with Matangi? Because while I was watching, I kept thinking we'd find out that one of these hidden islands was actually connected to a character that we already know. Imagine how much more of an impact it would have made if these new characters were not entirely random, but actually had deeper ties to the story. Instead, though, the people from the islands get maybe 5 minutes of screen time, and then we're just left feeling indifferent. Maui losing his tattoos and demigod powers, that could have been huge. It was such an emotional moment, but then, nothing. He just magically gets them back at the end. No explanation, no deeper meaning, nothing. Wouldn't it have been cool if his powers had some tie-in to his past with one of the islands, or if these communities could have done something to help him to reclaim those lost powers? Heck, that could have even been the plot for an episode if it had been a TV series. Now let's talk about the characters, starting with Moana's little sister Samea. If you're wondering why I didn't mention her at all in the summary, it's because, like most of the secondary characters in this movie, she's completely forgettable. If I'm being honest, her inclusion felt like a weird push to convince childless audience members to have kids. Moana acted more like Samea's parents than her actual parents did. And let me say, I've never met siblings that call each other little sis or big sis. Sure, Samea is adorable, but that's all she is. There was no personality, no depth. Just a tiny parrot repeating Moana's iconic lines from the first movie. She grabbed Maui's ear in one scene, and that's really all I remember about her. Now, if she were a little bit older, maybe 6 to 10 years old, she could have had a stronger role or actual personality traits to work with. Instead, she's just there. Speaking of characters who are just there, the overall side cast was lacking to say the least. The 3 people Moana brings along, they're basically there to take up space on the boat. Similar to Samea being Moana's reminder of home, the others do things. The historian translates for the Kakamora, the engineer makes the boat go faster when they need it to go, and the farmer doesn't really have to do with anything, but I kind of liked him. I thought his jokes and complaints were pretty funny, but maybe that's because I too like complaining. Regardless, there wasn't depth to any of them. They weren't fleshed out enough to make you care about them. Compare that to the first movie, where even Hey Hey, the literal chicken, had a defined purpose and personality. This time, Hey Hey still has his funny moments, but Pua, he's clearly there for merch sales and nothing more. Mind you, I think both Pua and Hey Hey are adorable, but it's just frustrating that it felt like the only reason he was included is because he wasn't in the first movie, and so his sales didn't do well. Now, I hate to compare this movie to a movie that I really didn't like, but it has to be done. The way these side characters had so much unused potential reminded me so much of the side characters in Wish, which, if you haven't seen my rant video on that movie, check it out after this one ends. There will be a link somewhere on the screen to take you right there. In Wish, some of the side characters served a linear purpose, such as that one guy that ratted Asha out, but mostly no one, aside from the villain and the protagonist, did anything solid, and not one was fleshed out or memorable. Moana 2, on the other hand, may not have had any developed side characters, but at least they served some form of a one-dimensional purpose. Like, even the non-villain Matangi had the purpose of bringing our heroes together and moving the plot along. My next issue is a problem not only with Moana 2, but with Disney movies in the more recent years. The side characters are boring. I understand they aren't going to be as meaningful or have as much time with the audience as the main characters, but there are plenty of movies that have been made in the past that managed to make me not only love the main character, but also love the side characters. One in particular that I have in mind is Princess and the Frog with Tiana and Lottie. While Tiana was the main character, Lottie not only served a large purpose to the plot, but she also displayed character growth. She loved and appreciated Tiana while also being her own developed character with her own trials and tribulations. Even Ray, a lightning bug, was a character that managed to devastate the audience by the end because of the emotional connections we made with him. There's so many other examples of this with other Disney movies too. Heck, there are examples even within the modern Disney movie era with movies like Frozen where there were multiple fleshed out secondary characters. Even Frozen 2 had more depth to their side characters than what's been coming out recently. Now, I bet you want to know about the music because the first Moana was full of absolute bangers for songs. So how did Moana 2 hold up? Were they bad? No. Were they great? Also, no. They were okay. Some were fun while you were watching. Two of the songs I actually like quite a bit. Both Beyond and Get Lost are pretty good, but none of them strike you in the feels quite the same way that How Far I'll Go does, and none of them stick in your head the way You're Welcome does. I saw this movie with a friend, and at the end of it, she said the only song she really liked was the one that was a reprise from the first movie. And I can't even blame this mid-tier music on it being a sequel because we have seen Disney make songs that tug at the heartstrings for their sequels, like with Show Yourself and Frozen 2. Every time I listen to that song, I still get chills, let alone when I watch the scene play out in the movie. I cry every single time. And I also don't want to blame this music on the original composer Lin-Manuel Miranda not being a part of the sequel because there's so many talented composers out there. And I think if anything, the real issue lies with the movie being rushed into a movie instead of the TV series that it was originally meant to be. I would love to understand what decisions were made to make Moana 2 a movie rather than the series adaptation that it was supposed to be. I personally think making a sequel to Moana was a better idea than a series, but I just hate that because everything was chosen at such a last minute to the point that it didn't get the time and the care that it deserved. As you're watching the movie, you can actually tell where certain scenes would have ended an episode. Like it was painfully obvious in about 2 sections of the movie. Moana is one of my favorites, and I truly just think she deserves so much more than this kind of rush job. Now there's something that I've been thinking about ever since I saw a TikTok on it. Should Moana even be considered a role model? She's the epitome of a main character. Everything works out for her, and her success is practically handed to her on a silver platter. No normal people just have the ocean literally become sentient for them. In the first movie, although this is still definitely the case, she did work for her success as well. She had to convince Maui to work with her. She by herself had to journey to restore the heart of Te Fiti. But in the sequel, it feels like things just fall into place a little too easily. Not only is the ocean still sentient for her, but the ceramic piece just happens to fall on Heihe's head. She just happens to run into Matangi, who transports her right to the island. She just happens to become a demigod at the end. A lot of it is just her being the chosen one. And while I don't necessarily mind that, I do think it's something that should be criticized at least a little bit when there's movies that exist inside the Disney bubble, like Hercules, where yes, he has his godly strength, it's just handed to him, but his hard work with Phil in order to become a true hero is not. One other thing I want to include before we wrap it up, as someone who has sensory issues, this movie was very goopy. I could have done without all of the bad textures. When the movie was pretty, it was stunning. But when they were trying to make something look gross, it looked disgusting. And if it had only happened once, I might not have even mentioned it here. But because it happened several times, I'm gonna complain about it. The first time it happened was right out of the gate when we saw Maui for the first time get sprayed by some mysterious liquid. The next is when the Kakamura realize that everyone should be on friendly terms, so they heal Moana and the crew's tranquilized state with a big green blobfish creature. I bet you can imagine that one right now, even if you haven't seen the movie. The final time that really got me was just the entire giant clam. He was not a sensory-friendly guy, I'll tell you that much. I could have also done without the fart joke that they made near the end. I don't really get why every kids movie nowadays thinks that it should have a fart joke, because not a single kid in that theater laughed, and that should tell you how effective those types of jokes are. So, would I recommend Moana 2? Yeah, I'd say give it a watch. It's entertaining enough, and it's fun getting to revisit the characters that I adored so much in the first movie. But would I spend money to see it again? Probably not. The lack of personality in the characters, the forgettable music, and the wasted potential of the plot held it back from being something that I want to add to my collection. It's not a bad movie, but it's pretty much just okay, which is a little bit disappointing. If you've seen Moana 2, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or are you like me and somewhere in between? If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Until next time, bye-bye!